Hi there, this is Solitary Ronin from Solitary Ronin Films, and welcome to another A to Z video. Today I'm going to talk about villains. Now, I do take some artistic license here to get every letter of the alphabet for a villain. Some of them I've went with their forename, others I've went with their surname. A couple of letters have ties because there's multiple villains that are so good on that letter that I had to call a draw. So we'll go through these, and I fully expect you to do your own A to Z video for villains and leave them in the comments, all 26 letters. Some of them are obvious, some of them are a bit of a stretch. But we'll start with the letter A, because I find that's the best place to start when you're doing an alphabet video. This is an obvious one. It's Angel Eyes from The Good, the Bad and Ugly. It's Lee Van Cleef, of course. He is the bad, after all. What a presence. Even though, as we know, the good actually kills more people in The Good, the Bad and Ugly than the bad does or the ugly does. But Lee Van Cleef with those wolfish looks, I mean, he's just super cool. He makes other people torture other people and he just sits back. He's got a great sense of humour, an amazing hat, and he's just brilliant. So of course it's going to be Angel Eyes for the letter A. For the letter B, I'm going with forename. And this is the only actor that appears twice. It's Brad Whitewood in At Close Range, played by, of course, Christopher Walken, who you can see why Sean Penn, as his estranged son, would be attracted to him and want to work with him, because he has that reptilian charm, but he also is full-blown Walken scary with that wonderful moustache and blonde fright wig. He is the epitome of evil, especially sometimes when he's lit a certain way. So he has that switch that he can flip between being friendly and alluring and then also being as cold as ice. So it's Christopher Walken as Brad Whitewood. The letter C is the first tie. Well, the first one is in a film with the letter C, and that's Chinatown, and it's the character of Noah Cross, played by John Huston. Now, I'm not as big a fan of Chinatown as other people, but it's still an excellent film. And obviously there's a 4K coming, which no doubt will look rather nice. I'm not a big fan of John Huston either as a director. I think he's on the overrated list for me, but most of his films are really good. But as an actor, you don't know how much acting John Huston was actually doing when he did some acting roles, but he's fairly chilling and callous as Noah Cross, who likes to keep it in the family. And he also kind of epitomises that untouchable rich person who thinks they can get away with anything because they're rich and powerful. And he really puts that across if you'll pardon the pun, in his threatening dialogue, which isn't really that threatening, but it's threatening. He's wonderful in the film, and fairly repellent. So who could equal that? Well, we're going to go to Frank Darabont's The Mist, and Marcia Gay Harden's turn as Mrs. Kermode, who, when they're all trapped in the supermarket, she's the religious nut who foresees everything as the work of God, and then starts whipping people into a frenzy, wanting human sacrifices to appease God by throwing people to the mist and the creatures in the mist. She's one of the most annoying, not necessarily annoying characters, but characters you really want to see something nasty happen to. And I'm sure it's one of those, she meets her end, there's like a cheer that goes up in theatres or cinemas or living rooms across the country. But she plays it so well. She doesn't go full blown over the top, but it's just that thing that you really want to put a bag over her head and throw her into the sea. So Mrs. Kermode from The Mist is tied with Noah Cross. Next, it's another tie. The character is Michelle de la Salle, played by Paul Maurice, who is a school teacher in La Diabolique, who is an absolute scumbag, who treats his wife, Mrs. Clouseau, terribly. I mean, Vera Clouseau only appeared in a few films, and they were all her husband's films, and she's treated fairly badly in all of them. As we know, Clouseau was a lovely man who treated everybody with respect. And Paul Maurice is known for being not the nicest person either. And Clouseau and Maurice come together to form this character who is an absolutely repellent and an absolute scumbag, and he's wonderful. So who could be as equally villainous as that? Well, we're going to Nightbreed, and this character here, Dr. Decker, played by David Cronenberg, who gives a wonderful turn as Dr. Decker, the psychiatrist who takes things a little bit too seriously. He does have a very creepy mask, but Cronenberg plays it brilliantly with that kind of even, deadpan, no emotion voice that is quite wonderful, and it's arguably Cronenberg's finest performance. Now the letter E is a bit shaky, but I've picked a Jacques Becker film, probably my least favourite Jacques Becker that I've seen, Edward and Caroline, and I'm picking the character Edward, played by Daniel Gillen. As I said, this is my least favourite Becker film. It's supposed to be a comedy about a failing marriage. Edward is a poor pianist who's married to Caroline, who comes from a fairly decent family, and her uncle looks down on Edward, and this makes him pretty much treat Caroline like poo, and just have this self-destructive attitude, and he's really annoying. I mean, again, this isn't an A to Z of annoying people. He is a villain in his own story, because Caroline doesn't do anything wrong. It's supposed to be about, the tumultuous nature of love and marriage, but it's more just like, don't marry an arsehole. As I said, my least favourite, Becker. You could argue it's his least Becker. But E was actually quite a difficult letter. That's why it's not the greatest villain in the world. He's just more of a self-destructive arse. But please let me know in the comments what your letter E would be. Now the letter F is obvious for me, but it's a tie. It's two people with the same name. It's Frank, played by Henry Fonda in Once Upon a Time in the West. And he blows away a kid. Fantastic. And strangely enough, it's also Frank, Frank Booth, played by Dennis Hopper in David Lynch's Blue Velvet. I don't really need to talk about these two performances. Obviously, famously, Henry Fonda turned up with black dark contacts, and he'd got a beard and a dark beard, and Sergio Leone just said, no, don't bother, I want people to go, oh my goodness, that's Henry Fonda, so give me those blue eyes back. And we don't need to know about Dennis Hopper and Blue Velvet, who basically phoned David Lynch up and said, I am Frank Booth. Two different performances, but both wonderful villains. Next is Dr. Genesee, played by Pierre Brasseur in Georges Franjo's Les Yeux Sans Visage, Eyes Without a Face. He plays, or Dr. Genesee, is a man who made a terrible mistake that hurt his daughter. So as fathers would do, he wants to make it up to his daughter by taking the faces off young women and trying to stick them on his daughter's face. Franjo's film is just absolutely beautiful. It's really oddly paced, in the sense it's almost like hypnotic. It's very trance-like, dreamlike. It's absolutely beautiful. Alida Valli does a wonderful turn in support as the Doctor's previous experiment, perhaps. But again, Genesee is, he's a scientist, he's a doctor, so he's very even-keeled, but he can only see the end point of helping his daughter. As the corpses mount, he's not really that bothered about the victims. It's all about his daughter and all about his redemption, which you kind of have to respect. Next, I'm using the forename. It's the only film Charles Laughton ever directed, and it's the character of Harry Powell, played of course by Robert Mitchum in all his cool and threatening manner. It couldn't really be anybody else for H, because Robert Mitchum's performance is just one of the great performances. Again, charming, puts certain people at ease, but also other people can see there's something not quite right, and just the sense of threat coming from the man, this almost unstoppable force, this almost force of nature that he is, that just explodes this pastoral paradise that Laughton creates, and just blows up I suppose it is a kind of false family situation with Annabelle Gish and the two kids. Just an amazing performance by Robert Mitchum. For I, there wasn't going to be anybody else. It's El Indio and Gian Maria Volonté giving an outrageously brazen performance. Again, I've said before, I've become a huge Volonté fan in the last 2 or 3 years, because Fistful of Dollars and A Few Dollars More was really the only thing I'd seen him in until recently, and then you realise what a great actor he was, and he could do anything. He could do the quiet stuff, like Christ Stopped at Eboli, and he can do this mad villain who's on drugs most of the time. Just absolutely phenomenal. Because that's the thing. Clint Eastwood, he's on the cover, but he's not the star, let's be honest. Lee Van Cleef and Volonté blow Clint Eastwood away. For Jay, it's fairly deep as well. It's Dr. Jack Griffin. You say, well, who the hell is Dr. Jack Griffin? Well, it's Claude Rains in The Invisible Man. Got the best fist in cinema history, so to speak. Again, you really get the sense as the drug has taken over, you get the sense his brain is being ripped apart and he becomes more and more maniacal. He starts off being a doctor just doing it for research, but then he wants to control the world and have them at his knees. It's just a wonderful performance for Claude Rains, who, we don't see him because he's invisible. That voice is just absolutely magnificent, and the epitome of the good old-fashioned power-hungry villain who wants to take over the world. So for Kay, we're going to Takashi Miike. We're going to Tadanobu Asano, and his performance as Kakihara in Ichi the Killer. Now, you could argue Shinya Tsukamoto is the villain of the film. You could even make the argument that Ichi, the killer, is the villain of the film. Kakihara is almost, I was going to say the innocent victim, but that's not really, he's not innocent in any way, shape or form. He's the love-stricken character who'll do anything to get his old boss back, because his old boss beats him up and he loves it when he beats him up. So I guess in the traditional sense he's not necessarily the villain. There's certainly worse characters than Kakihara and Ichi the Killer, but he's on the cover, man. He hangs up poor Susumu Terajima, burns him with oil. He's not the hero of the film, put it that way. Next, we're going to Pearl and Pressburger. We're going to an opera, and it's the character of Lindorf in Tales of Hoffmann, played wonderfully by Robert Helpmann. You don't even need the volume on, you can just watch his eyes as he plays 4 villains in the life of Hoffmann, everybody's favourite operatic idiot. Lindorf at times is like a vampire or the devil, obviously in the Venice sequence, but he's always trying to screw up Hoffmann's life, but then Hoffmann is a complete buffoon and deserves everything he gets. Again, it's so unique in the sense the hero we're supposed to root for is an absolute clown, and Lindorf easily defeats him every single time. But Robert Helpmann, who obviously would be the child snatcher in Chitty Chitty Bang Bang, which terrified generations of kids as well, he's just stunningly good in this. Is it a perfect film by Pearl and Pressburger? No, but it's certainly one of my favourites. Just absolutely gorgeous. So M is the first and only, I think, 3-way tie, for different reasons. So, speaking of Michael Powell, we're going for Mark in Peeping Tom, played brilliantly by Carol Boehm, probably, well, it is his greatest performance. And the reason, one of the many reasons that everybody had a problem with Peeping Tom when it came out was because the killer was sympathetic. He wasn't just a monster or a madman. He was soft-spoken. He was shy. He's everybody's favourite sociopath. And Karl Bohm just plays it with almost a childhood innocence, because the film is about how you can destroy children at an early age and screw them up for their entire lives. It's just a beautiful performance. This is the 4K, which is obviously coming out in Criterion 4K as well. And then I couldn't do M without obviously Ming the Merciless, perhaps in the discussion for the greatest villain of them all. I mean, look at that. Ming the Merciless. I mean, Max von Sydow playing this in full earnest, playing it as if he's a true dictator, with wonderful moments of physical, the bit where he just like clenches his fist and people are talking about him, his eyes, his eyebrows. It's a physical performance as well as a vocal performance, just the way he moves, because he knows he's all that, because he's Ming. Just an amazing performance in one of the greatest documentaries of all time. But the last M that I couldn't kind of leave out is Wes Studi as Mugwai in Last of the Mohicans of Michael Mann. Just the sheer nastiness of him, the sheer vendetta nature of him. He lost his family to the British, so he's going to get some by helping the French. Just physical, brutal character, but one of the best moments in the film and his performance is when somebody decides to rather choose death than go with him, and he just watches it and just kind of goes and just move on. It's just that complete lack of empathy or anything, because he's just so focused on bloodlust, so focused on revenge, that he is driven. It's just a wonderful performance by Studi, who'd obviously go on be in Heat, and he's been in Walter Hill's Geronimo. It's just a wonderful performance of just, and being bloody scary as well. For N, a fairly obvious one, it's Nosferatu, who's Dracula. I mean, technically it's Count Orlok or Dracula, but I'm just cheating and calling it Nosferatu. Certainly influential in the look. I mean, Salem's Lot is basically the Nosferatu design, and much more animalistic, much more rat-like, certainly creepy. You could throw in Klaus Kinski's rendition of it as well in the 79 remake by Herzog, which you could make the argument is better than the original. But iconic. One of the villains on this list is just purely iconic. So next is the letter O, I believe, and it's the operative from Serenity, the Joss Whedon Firefly offshoot, played by Chiwetel Ejiofor, who I've said before, for me is the best actor of his generation, but for some reason it hasn't translated into lots of leading roles. I mean, he did 12 Years a Slave and that didn't really catapult him. He just became kind of supporting actor for some reason. But I've said that his performance as the operative in Serenity is like the best villain performance of the last 30 years, because he doesn't overplay it the way quite a lot of people who play villains do. They feel they've got to chew scenery because somehow that's what villains do, whereas he is very down to earth. He knows what he is, he knows what he's doing, he knows the purpose of what he's doing, and he knows once his job is finished, his place is not in this world, that he'll help create this better world, because he knows he can't exist in that. And it's just such a brilliant performance. You know, the intro scene, I can't remember how many times I've actually just watched the intro scene where he's introduced. And again, he kills people, but it's all very matter of fact. It's part of his job. He doesn't get any pleasure from it. I mean, we're all used to villains having, you know, kinks and perversions, which makes them even more villainous. You know, the spaghetti western whole genre, there's all these villains that just get more and more ridiculous in their kinks and their perversions, but he is very, this is my job, this is what I do, you know. It's very functional, but it's grounded, and as I said, it's one of the best villain performances of the last 25-30 years. Next is more, it's an icon, but not necessarily about the quality of the films. It's Pinhead from the Hellraiser films. I love Pinhead. I love Hellraiser. All 14 or 15 films I don't love. I mean, they never got... Barker to me is very much like Lovecraft. You can't really put his literature into film properly because it's ideas, and they never kind of... Even Barker making the first one, it's not fully realised. But Pinhead became an icon, and Hellbound Heart, the novella, he's just like a supporting Cenobite essentially. And then obviously after the first film he started being called Pinhead, but he was never Pinhead in the book, in the novella, or the original film. He was just lead Cenobite. Doug Bradley's performance is just wonderful, but obviously as the series went on, Doug Bradley dropped out of quite a few of the later ones. Obviously there's a middle patch of the series that was basically another film, and they just added Pinhead to it, or another script and they just added Pinhead to it. You know, it's one of my ambitions to do a Hellraiser sequel, but do it properly. Obviously just in my mind. The Scarlet Gospels is a wonderful kind of closing book by Barker, but there's no way you could film it, because again it's just Pinhead goes to hell, but the world of hell that Barker creates in the book, you just couldn't recreate that on film, I don't think. But I love Pinhead, even although the actual universe that was created on film in the series doesn't have a very high batting average, but Pinhead's wonderful. The next one is the letter Q, which I haven't dug the Blu-ray disc out. Because of space, I did have to put some of my standard Blu-rays just in disc form into sleeves. I know it's sacrilege. But we're going to Cliffhanger, and Eric Quaylen. Q is not that easy. Eric Quaylen, played by John Lithgow. I didn't realise until recently that Quaylen was actually just going to be the second in charge baddie, because Christopher Walken was actually going to be the lead baddie in Cliffhanger, which would have been amazing, but Christopher Walken pulled out. Maybe he doesn't like snow, so therefore John Lithgow's Quaylen became the lead villain. Now, as a complete opposite to Chiwetel Ejiofor in Serenity, John Lithgow's completely going for it, chewing scenery. He's got a ridiculous British accent. It's kind of the villain with a tongue-in-cheek, knows he's in an action film villain. It's a lot of fun, but not necessarily realistic form of villainy, because his plan isn't very smart. and his team aren't very clever, but it's a lot of fun. So from John Lithgow in Snow, we go to somebody in Altitude. The letter R, for me, there could be only one, and it's from my favourite nun film, in the argument for my favourite films of all time. It's Black Narcissus, of course, and it's Sister Ruth, played by Kathleen Byron, who has the most devastating use of a lipstick in cinema history, and goes psychotic for David Farrar shorts. We've all done it. Yeah, she's the slightly unbalanced nun who's on probation, but all that wonderful air in the Himalayas, which was obviously in a studio, just goes to her head, and then Farrar's shorts, it just takes her over, and she's jealous of Deborah Kerr, and she wants to kill Deborah Kerr and get David Farrar for herself. And again, the moment she brings out lipstick and taunts Deborah Kerr with a lipstick, you know it's on. It's just a crazed performance, but it's just absolutely brilliant, as is the film, of course. And same for the letter S. Might be the greatest villain of all time, even though, like quite a lot of villains, he's not actually successful in what he wants to do. It's Shere Khan, of course, from the Jungle Book. This is a seminal film for me. I love tigers, and when I saw this for the first time, it just blew my mind. At one point I actually saw it in the cinema, obviously not when it came out in 1967. But Shere Khan is just brilliant. Again, it's how to do a villain properly. He's not on screen for a lot of time, but you hear about him. He's built up into this myth. We see him slinking about in the grass, but we don't see him fully until near the end of the film. Now, as I've said before, I think the proper ending would have been Shere Khan to disembowel Mowgli and devour him and feed on his corpse, as Baloo and Bagheera stand and watch. But for some reason Disney didn't do that. Mowgli, I should have actually had Mowgli as M, along with Mugwai and Mark from Peeping Tom and Ming, because Mowgli's really the villain of this film, because he ties a flaming branch to a tiger's tail. That's not nice. Plus he leaves these talking animals for a wee girl just because she wiggles her nose at him. So in actual fact, Mowgli should be an M as well as a villain, not Shere Khan. Maybe it's just me, but I wanted Shere Khan to sever Mowgli's spinal cord, therefore suffocating him and then feeding on his dangly little corpse. So the letter T. Again, I think for me this one's fairly obvious. It's Manhunter and Tom Noonan as the Tooth Fairy, which is a ridiculous nickname. Also Tom Noonan is a large man, so as a villain he's intimidating just because of his size, and then the way he looks and the fact that he's quite got a light voice, so he doesn't have this big booming voice, and obviously butchering whole families, just to kind of get off on your own fantasies. If one does as God does enough times, one will become as God is. So if you turn it around by pretending and fantasising about these women wanting him, if he does it enough times, then he'll become one that is wanted. We've all done it, but just the physicality of him, in the way in that scene where Joan Allen's co-worker is taking about a bit of pollen out of her eye, But of course Tom Noonan is fantasising and projecting that the guy's actually romantically holding her face, whatever. And then he just walks up to him without a word and just like blows him away as if he was taking a bit of pollen out of somebody's eye. It doesn't matter, it's not even a thing, you don't need to think about it, it's just like, you're gone, you're in my way, you're gone. That kind of callousness is truly chilling. Plus he knows how to damage minivan dashboards quite well. Next is the letter U. Another tricky one, but I've went for Yunosuke from Yojimbo, played by Tatsuo Nakadai. He's the gun-toting cousin, I think. Not sure whether he's a cousin. Certainly he's the gun-toting hoodlum that comes in later in the film. And you think, wait a second, he's got a gun. Yojimbo might be in trouble here, or Sanjuro might be in trouble here. And again, it's another Nakadai wolfish performance. Those crazed eyes, that wolf-like smile. Not that I've ever seen wolf smile that much. And again, for a large part of my film watching, Nakadai was the guy with the gun in Yojimbo, and of course in Ran and Kagemusha. But of course now I've seen him in Human Condition, and I've seen him in so much stuff. I'm hoping to do a favourite 50 actors list, and certainly those three Japanese legends of Nakadai, Mifune and Shimura. For years it was Mifune being number one, but we'll see what happens, because Nakadai certainly rocketed up the board in the last 3-4 years since I've had this channel, or 5-6 years I've had this channel. So Nakadai is the letter U for Unosuke, or Unosuke. V is natural to go with a film called Villain with Richard Burton, where he plays Vic Dakin, who is basically an amalgam of both Cray brothers. So he has a bit of a liking to Ian McShane, and he's also a complete psychopath. It has, there's a there's a kind of camp nature to Burton's performance, but it's also completely demented. The final scene where he's arrested and he's shouting at all the people in this kind of estate who are looking out the windows at what's happening. His rant that he goes on is just absolutely brilliant. It's not a perfect film, but it's a lot of fun, and Richard Burton is just going for it. So it's fitting that V is for Vic Dakin in a film called Villain, which is what the A to Z list is about. W, I've went for Lady Washizu from Kurosawa's Throne of Blood, which is obviously a reworking of Macbeth, so it's essentially Lady Macbeth. A wonderful performance by Yamada Isuzu, with wonderful no eyebrows, as in NOH, not no eyebrows. Mifune, you could argue, is actually doing a little bit too much in this film when he finally goes bananas. But the performance by Lady Macbeth is fantastic. The way she slithers about, and the sound of her kimono on the wooden floors. It's a great performance in a great film, which might be up there with my favourite Kurosawa film. For X, for me this is simple. There only is one, and it's Dr. Xavier from Man with X-Ray Eyes by Roger Corman. God, I love this film. Ray Milland is absolutely fantastic as a man who wants to see beyond sight. As, again, very much like The Invisible Man, the effects start to affect his brain, and he gets more maniacal as his desire to see more and more and more until he sees the universe, and it has just an amazing ending as well. Yeah, it's just a fantastic film and performance, and Ray Milland said that and The Lost Weekend are basically his favourite performances and his favourite films that he was in. So for why, I'm going for a pretty famous character that has been lampooned and copied, and it's Sadako Yamamura, to give her full name, from the Ring series, but I'm really just talking about the first one. I think most of us can remember the first time we saw Ring, not the American remake, obviously, which I've still never seen. Yeah, we can remember the first time we saw Ring, and the first time we saw the climax of Ring, where Sadako Yamamura does something to television you're not supposed to do. I remember the first time it gave me the willies. Certainly doesn't really give me the willies now, but she is fairly iconic in that long-haired Japanese icon which goes back through history, and there's always tales of long-haired ghosts throughout Japanese history, and this was kind of the explosion of the J-horror cycle, and it's just quite wonderful, and that's why I don't go anywhere near a wishing well, for obvious reasons. So for the letter Z, again, you might think this was difficult, but for me this was easy. Again, I don't have the Blu-ray disc at hand because it's just in a sleeve somewhere in a cupboard. But Christopher Walken was for the letter B, so of course he's for the letter Z, and his performance is Max Zorin in A View to a Kill, which is arguably my favourite, well, it's probably my second favourite James Bond film, obviously behind Live and Let Die with Yaphet Kotto. But Walken and Grace Jones are both fantastic in this. The moment when Walken finds out that James Bond's Licence to Kill is just one of the great Walken moments in cinema history. Again, he has a blonde fright wig on. He's just amazing, eyes bulging and inflections of lines flying everywhere. It's just a magnificent performance, and it's one of the Bond villains. You know, a lot of Bond villains are kind of full of threat, you know, want to take over the world, blah blah blah, but you always feel they're kind of in control. But because Max Zorin is just, essentially, and he's a super being, you do feel he's completely unhinged, and could explode in any second. I mean, again, James Bond films, I think in the UK, were pretty much all PGs until later on. But there is a moment where Zorin grabs an automatic weapon and just mows down lots of workers with complete glee and joy, which is quite astounding. Yeah, so it could only be Max Zorin for the letter Z or Z. Again, please leave comments below what your letter Z would be. But it's fitting that Christopher Walken appears on the list twice because he's so awesome. So thanks very much for watching this A to Z. By all means, choose some of your favourite villains and their corresponding letter. Villains can come in all shapes and sizes. as long as they're wonderful. And let's be honest, there's plenty of films where you actually root for the villain more than the hero, quote, hero, or the protagonist. It's much more fun being a villain and doing whatever you like, but as long as you do it well. So thanks very much for watching. Please let me know in the comments below, as I said, what your A to Z villainy list would look like, and hopefully you'll join me again for more A to Z lists. This is Saulutch Ronan from Saulutch Ronan Films saying farewell.